But I didn't quite realize, I guess until I read this book with Brother Hall, of how much he dominates the early portion of the history that was recorded for us in Genesis. And 3 of the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis are devoted to Noah. Why do you suppose that is? Is he that special? Probably so. It's also a significant time in man's history where essentially everyone else had turned away from God. It became, as the scriptures put it, exceedingly, utterly wicked. So do we live in a time of a lot of wickedness? Do we live in a time that was as wicked as discussed in these early chapters of Genesis? Yes, David?
I don't know whether you really got a definitive answer for that or not, but there's so many things that go on today that we look at that are wicked that we really don't have control over. And I know that Noah had those things too. We know that much, and it may have been more, or it may not have. We really don't know that. But we face challenges in our life.
And it's, I think, important for us to recognize, though, Noah and his immediate family were the only people that were serving God. There was no one else. None. There wasn't an assembly like we have here to come together with people of like spiritual mindedness, trying to serve God the way He has laid out for us. We didn't have this group of people. He didn't have any support. He had his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. And that's it. Everyone else had different ideas. Can you imagine what it would be if you and your immediate family were the only ones to serve God? Sometimes it kind of feels that way. But we also have other Christians that we can lean on. Other Christians that we can turn to help us, and we can help them. Noah didn't have that. So I guess kind of looking at the questions on, I'm assuming you all have read this material. If you haven't, I really, really strongly recommend that you do so. And continue to keep up with this. As Brother Jerry mentioned to me before class, he's read the entire book already. He probably will again more times than one more time as we go through this class. This is, I think, excellent material that Brother Hall has put together, but more so we can turning to the scriptures with these things. But we'll try in our classes to look through the questions as a way of discussing what is in each of the chapters. So we're kind of talking about question 1, what makes the character of Noah so remarkable in his early years? What did God say about him in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 9? Say that again. He walked with God. When no one else was doing this, he was walking with God. He did what was God expected of Noah, what God expected of everyone. But he was the only one living up to the expectations. part of question one there is in context of our generation. This how Noah had said that in verse 9, Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Does that give you the idea that maybe God had different standards with different generations? That's probably not what you were wanting to talk about, Mark, but that's it.
Somewhat related. Noah, given that everyone else was wicked, Noah could have just been kind of ambivalent and still been not as bad as everyone else. So by comparison, if everyone, if the thoughts and imaginations of everyone else is on evil continuously, I mean, that's a very, very low bar. Noah, he just could have been, as I said, not as actively wicked as everyone else, still been, the most righteous. Probably not the most righteous man, maybe the best man on earth by comparison, but Noah wasn't merely neutral. He walked with God. He was righteous. As you were just saying, blameless. He was overtly positive, not merely by comparison, but he wasn't merely ignoring the evil around him. He was distancing himself. He was not tainted by it. And that's pretty remarkable in and of itself. It's not just it's not a narrow majority that puts Noah as being this righteous person, but a very significant one. He must have, maybe through his upbringing or maybe early experience with God, we're not told about, that galvanized. He had conditioned his life to be not as bad as everyone else, but distinctively better. So much so that he could be used in later comparisons. Ezekiel writes of Noah, Daniel, and Job. That even they would only escape with their own lives in the current situation. As righteous as these people, Noah is practically a byword or the name brand of righteousness in his generation and for generations to follow. This is not accidental. This is something that he did very deliberate.
I think the scriptures bear that out, Mark. If you look at in Genesis chapter 6, in verse 22, where it says, thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him. So he did. And then this is kind of talking about building the ark, and then at the end of that process, God says basically the same thing in chapter 7 and verse 5. And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. He wasn't just better than others. He wasn't comparing himself to the world round about him. It's very easy for us to feel really good about ourselves when we've got a really, really horrible neighbor. Well, I'm better than him. Many years ago when we lived somewhere, we had a neighbor that was pretty bad. It's pretty easy to feel good about yourself saying, I'm not like him. But that wasn't what Noah was doing. He was righteous, a just man. In Genesis chapter 7 and verse 1, it says, Then the Lord said to Noah, Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Righteous. So, question 2, how old was Noah when he died? 950 years old. People lived longer at this point in time in history than they do today. Noah was somewhere probably a little short of being 500 years old when he started building the ark, when God gave him the command to build the ark. He was 600 years old when he and his family got on the ark. He lived 350 years more beyond that. So basically, sort of 2/3 of his life was lived by the time he got on the ark. And by the way, notice that here's a man who is 600 years old And he doesn't have any grandchildren. That's kind of interesting. It's hard to say, but how many grandchildren I'll have if I live to 600. Probably not going to live to be 600 years old. Not probably, I won't. Noah was unique. He stood out. He was just. He walked with God, righteous. But then, was he perfect? What's that? I think that word perfect is translated perfect as blameless. He didn't find fault in him, but the scriptures record for us that he did actually sin. What was the sin that he committed? As Tom said before class, he got hammered. Drunkenness. In Genesis chapter 9, beginning, and there. Says in chapter 9, beginning in verse 20, and Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. Is drunkenness a sin? How do we know? Are we just born instinctively knowing that drunkenness is a sin? The scriptures tell us, doesn't it? Galatians 5 tells us that. You said 75? Okay. I didn't look all of those up and didn't count, but I will not doubt. I'm assuming you used a concordance or other reference materials. Refer you back to Tom's class of a few quarters ago of tools that we can use in studying the Bible. So, what effect did, this is question, I'm skipping ahead too much. Okay. Question 3, what advantages do we have in our generation that Noah didn't have? That's sort of an open-ended question. There's a lot of ways to answer that. I'm curious to see how some of you answered that. Don't really think this is what Brother Hall was getting at, but one of the advantages we've learned the ability to distill alcohol and have a lot stronger drink than what Noah had. So we can get drunk a lot easier. Okay, Leo? There's.
Yeah. The key advantage I see is we have so much greater support with our fellow Christians. He was in a world where every individual he encountered thought about evil.
So we have an advantage of having support from those round about us. We have an advantage of that. Do you think Noah knew what he was doing when he drank the wine and got drunk? There's speculation about that, but realistically, I think you'd have to think so. I would. Grape juice tastes different than fermented grape juice. Has different effect on you. Just Mark.
Advantages that we have, it's not an advantage, you've already, I think, alluded to the fact that we have much more potent hallucinogens and drugs that can be abused than was available in Noah's time. Noah may not have had since he was late in life adopting this practice of farming, he may not have really realized all the risk that he was entailing, but it looks like he deliberately made wine, because that's one of the things you can do when you grow things. You can make more potent versions of them as produce. But he may not, and we don't have no idea what God told him in terms of what laws, what commandments, or what God's expectations were for Noah at this particular time, because the scriptures just simply don't describe that for us. We don't really know what God had forbidden him to do or what he did encourage him to do, but we do know that Noah has this pattern of following after God's commands. And it may have been that God didn't give him a prohibition from drinking this product of the fruit that you grew, and he stumbled on it. That's, I guess, a possibility. But we have not only a better understanding of the problem, we also have many worse versions of it. I mean, it's not merely being drunken on wine, drunken on opiates, or drunken on marijuana, or drunken on other narcotics or hallucinatory drugs is still the problem. The problem, I think, where the sin is having our thinking impaired, not being aware enough so that we can follow God's commands adequately. That's the real sin here. The drunkenness was the means just to get there. And Noah's ability at the time to achieve this state, I think, were quite a bit limited compared to ours. But that's again, looking at comparisons forward and backward. And the biggest, I think, advantage that we can have is we have the example of Noah. And we have the scriptures revealed to us, and God's been articulate in the New Testament and the Old Testament about warning us about being sober-minded as far as our service to Him, that we shouldn't put ourselves in a state in which we can advertently or inadvertently disobey Him and run the risk of sinning against God. And we have a lot more that's said about that in the scriptures and warnings to us than perhaps Noah had. He certainly didn't have the scriptures as we have them. We don't really know what God had told him in very much detail. But we're better equipped to understand this problem, I think it's fair to say, than Noah.
We certainly have the advantage of medical research, understanding of what these various substances do to our bodies, to our minds, to our ability to think, to our ability to reason. Question number 4, has God asked us to do anything as challenging as building the ark as He designed it? Okay, show of hands of no, He's not asked us to do anything that challenging. Show of hands, those of yes, He has asked, or those that you think both ways. Yes, David.
I guess I'll talk about this question maybe in a little different way, but if we think about Noah and building the ark, or if we would be asked to build the ark, first thing, I don't think I'm going to live 480 years old to start building the ark. But what has God asked us to do in our lives? And that might be, a big challenge to us. Maybe we might look at as a major challenge in our lives that might be there. And I look back at 2 Corinthians 5, verse 15, and it said, and who died for all, that those who live to live no longer for themselves, but for him who died for them and rose again. So I think it would be maybe our time to be comparable to something that Noah did. It's not just building an ark, but actually living our whole lives for God. That's a big challenge too.
I think we have to look at it in this way that God asked Noah to do this, and Noah did. God gave him adequate time to accomplish it. He certainly faced ridicule and everything else from those around him. God asks us, though, he hasn't asked us to physically build an ark. But what has he asked us? He's asked us to give him our best. He's asked us to submit our will to his, to live for him. He expects us to do that with the utmost of our ability. He expected Noah to build the ark just exactly the way he laid out for him to do, to the best of his ability. He expects us to follow his instructions for our lives serving him with everything that we have. He doesn't ask us to do something that we don't have the ability, that he hasn't given us the ability to do. But he asks us to do everything to the best that we can. He doesn't expect our second best. Noah didn't build the ark close enough. He didn't build it, well, it's hard to get all the wood that I need for this section of it. I'll just kind of cut some corners here and put in a few more windows. It doesn't really matter if it's not quite as wide as God said it should be. It'll be okay. No, Noah did all that God instructed him to do, just like we need to do all God instructed. So he expects from us really the same. All that he instructs us to do, he expects us to do. So question 5, what did Noah accomplish with his family? Yes, Todd.
Building the ark, what an adventure that must have been. And just every day working on something together for the Lord, how that would be brought closure.
I think the Hebrew writer kind of sums this up in Hebrews 11, verse 7. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to the faith. Saving his household. Can you imagine the conversations Noah had with his sons? Dad, why do we have to build this ark? Nobody else is. Why can't I go off and do things with my friends? They're not doing this. It won't matter if we just skip it just this once. There was no one else. There was no support group, as Leo mentioned. It had never rained. Why is he building a boat? Why is he building a big boat? How's he going to get it to water? Noah's nuts. Dad, you know what everybody's saying about you and us? Come on, give us a break. Noah led his family to God in spite of all these things going on around. That tells us we can lead our families to God in spite of what's going on in the world around us. And we really have it easier because we have fellow Christians to help and support, to encourage. We can look to as examples. There's others we can look to as warnings as well. We've got a lot of things that we can look to. But then, later in life, sin enters Noah's life. What effect did that? Yes, Joanne.
The also, the other thing is that, go back to the, of his generation, I think that's not a reference to the fact that, relatively speaking, but a reference to how much God had revealed himself to man at different times in our history. So that, like Enoch also walked with God and then was no more, because God took him. So I think Noah walked with God according to what he knew of God and he sought God and so forth. And that's something that we all do maybe a little bit.
I think that's very much the case. We certainly see that God's dealing with mankind has, from the early patriarchal dispensation where he spoke directly to the fathers, where he gave the law of Moses in the time of the Israelites when we brought them out of Egyptian captivity. The time that we have the sacrifice of Jesus as a propitiation for our sins, as our Redeemer, and his commandments that he's laid down, or the ones that many of them that from the law of Moses that he reiterated, but not all. And our expectation and his expectation for us to submit our lives to him, to put on Christ as you would put on a coat, to be intimately familiar with Christ and with his expectations, to knowing what he wants us to do, to making it become just second nature to us as part of our lives. We don't know exactly what God had instructed Noah to do, but we do know that there was enough instructions that we can see from the world, the way he described it, just utterly thinking of evil continually. So God did explain the difference between good and evil. And in general, mankind chose evil. Question 6, what effect did his sin have on his family? The account in Genesis 9 tells us that Ham, as a result of his interaction with Noah, became cursed. And that affected his descendants and went to many generations. Sometimes we think of this idea of substance abuse or alcoholism or drunkenness as really just affecting ourselves and doesn't affect anybody else. But the reality is it does affect others. There's something that I ran across a few years ago, actually, going through some of the things from my parents' and grandparents' estate, is a songbook from, it was actually a reprint of one originally published in 1917, and this is a revised edition in 1927, which coincidentally was one of the editors of this songbook was Sewell Hall's grandfather. But that's not. There's a song in this book titled, Papa, Why Don't You Stop Drinking? And there is a preface to this song. It says, on hearing evangelist J.S. Burke of Texas lecture telling of his awful life when he was a drunkard and how his Christian companions plead with him and with God in his behalf for 17 years, and how his little daughter, Essie, followed him one morning to the saloon, holding his hand and pleading with him to stop drinking and come home and stay with them, and that her mama was dying of a broken heart, and should she be taken, no one would be left to love and care for her and little brother. The author was impressed to write these lines, and may they bring light to some benighted home. This is written by Will M. Ramsey. And a lot of times in songs, there's instructions on how to sing the song. It was kind of telling that the instructions for singing this song is to sing it slow and pathetic. It goes like this. Oh, Papa, why don't you stop drinking? Our home is so lonely and sad, and Mama is rapidly sinking. Oh, Papa, she's looking so bad. Her heart is all broken by sorrow because of your drinking, I know. And should she be called home tomorrow, oh, where would your little ones go? Oh, Papa, I pray you stop drinking and come back and love us again. Of you we are constantly thinking, and Mama often whispers your name. Her voice is so weak and so feeble, her eyes now with tears have grown dim. Perhaps she will never be able to sing us just one more sweet hymn. Then, Papa, how can I stop pleading? Oh, do not refuse me, I pray. My poor Mama's heart is now bleeding, and yet you are staying away. Oh, do you not love us, dear Papa? Pray look at my eyes once again and see there the traces of Mama ere she by your life has been slain. Oh, who in this world then would love us should Mama be taken away? For Papa, you do not care for us, or else you would come home and stay. We love you, dear Papa, as ever. 'Twas drinking that drove you from home. It came sweetest love cords to sever and cause us in sorrow to roam. This was written at a time when this country was faced with serious problem with alcoholism. It was in the midst of the temperance movement, and the Constitution was amended for the prohibition and banning alcohol. Of course, that didn't solve the problem. What needed to solve the problem was a change of people's hearts. But substance abuse is not just a problem for those that are participating in it. It affects those around them. I'm sure we all know people that are, maybe it's even affected us. But it's a serious problem. So we need to think about this, those of us that are approaching old age. What it is that we do and how it affects those around us. Question 7, what habits of ours can affect our families for their harm? Yes, Cynthia. Pretty sure Cynthia was quoting Galatians 5. These are the works of the flesh. These have an effect on those around us. The reality is we can, no matter what our age, but sin can cause us to lose our souls, but it also can influence others around us. Not putting God first, finding something else that's more important to us, can influence others to do the same thing. Excuses to be putting off what we know what the right thing to do is, but well, I'll get to that later. I'm too tired. After I get that surgery on my knee, I'll be back to normal and I'll just do it later. We don't have the option of retiring from being a Christian. We need to continually, actively search for opportunities to do good. So the opposite of doing these things is what we can do for their good. We can be the kind of examples we need to be to our children, to our grandchildren, to those that all of our acquaintances, to our fellow Christians, young and old. There are, as I've gone through this book, it's brought to my recollection older Christians that have had an influence on me in my life. It's also brought to recollection those that had a bad influence. We need to remember and recognize that whether we want to or not, we have an influence on those around us. God designs question number 8. Why do you think God has designated drunkenness as a sin? We sort of talked around that in a lot of ways this morning. But why is that? Jack, Cynthia? Lowers our resistance to other sin. A lot of we don't think clearly. Alcohol and then other narcotics, opiates, the hallucinogenic drugs cause us not to think clearly, our judgment's impaired. We would do something that we wouldn't do otherwise, or we would not do something we would do otherwise. By the way, one of the, I guess I've never tried this, but I understand one of the more powerful hallucinogens is the secretion from the skin of a particular frog. What I wonder is, who licked that frog for the first time and figured that out? That's just, I'm sorry, I'm not going to lick any frogs. Who wants to lose control? Why do you suppose people turn to these things? And I think there's a lot of things, especially the elderly, there are things that are in our lives that cause us it. Question 9, what are some things that tempt aging Christians to turn to alcohol and other drugs? Things like the unknown of retirement, death of a family member or a spouse, close friend, the death of a pet. We want to forget about the pain that we're in. We lose our income, our retirement goes away. We no longer have what we thought was the ability to take care of ourselves. We have to rely on others, maybe go into a assisted care facility. Maybe it's family conflicts. Our children don't get along. They're constantly fighting. Maybe it's our health declines, physically and mentally, depression, major surgeries that we have to face in the long road to recovery. I'm really not sure how she did it, and my mother had 4 open heart surgeries. and the physical discomfort and pain that she went through in the rehab each time was phenomenally, I mean, to me, I just couldn't see how but she was happy to do it and had a great attitude. But others don't always have that attitude. Get depressed, sad. We need to recognize as Christians, and to use Cynthia's phrase, no matter what age, to take care with these things. Even prescription drugs. Many can be addicting. If we find ourselves in a situation where we are becoming dependent on some substance, we need to get help. We need to get medical help from a physician, from somebody who's trained to help with this. This is serious. If you haven't read it yet, Brother Hall talks about a lady who overcame her addiction. Those stories are there. It's possible. We can do it. With God's help, we can do these things. Substance abuse is real. Over 10% of the elderly population is in some sort of alcoholism or substance abuse. It's real. Don't pretend it doesn't exist. Don't pretend that it's not going to happen to me. Recognizing that we can turn to God, meditate on His Word, prayer, study, support of others. It's a way to overcome this. And if you find yourself in this, get help. We're out of time this morning. Looking forward to picking this up with chapter 3 next week.